Hello, everybody. My name is Lars Nelson. I program here at AFS Cinema, Austin Film Society. This is the Jewels in the Wasteland series. Is anybody here seeing one of the Jewels in the Wasteland shows for the first time? All right. This is the next to last in this installment of Jewels in the Wasteland, but we'll see when the next one can happen. Next week, Wings of Desire plays, and that's the end of it for this series. And just to give you a setup, in case you didn't get the whole thing, like 3 years ago, we did a series of 1980 to 1983, and then like a year later or something, we did the next 3 years, and this is the last 3 years of the 80s. So this is, which is, what was that, 87, 88, 89? Because 1990 isn't actually the 80s, even though like technically, I suppose, it's the capper of the decade, but I don't think it works that way. So, and we're so lucky to have AFS artistic director and founder Richard Linklater here to introduce each one and to participate in a discussion after each show. So that's going to happen again next week for Wings of Desire, which is unbelievable. Watching Wings of Desire on the big screen, you got to be here for it. And then next time around, we do a Jewels in the Wasteland. Be hip, be on top of it, so that you're catching the whole thing, because it's been an incredible series. To go all the way through 87 through 89 and just have a real newfound respect for that period. But I'm not going to say anything else, because right about now we're going to bring to the stage AFS Artistic Director and Founder Richard Linklater to tell you about James Joyce and John Huston's The Dead.
All right, thanks, Lars. And I'm just excited to see so many people here. The weather's perfect for this movie. If you whiten it up a little bit with some snow, and we'd be there 100%. But it's very much a winter movie. This whole series is just like this subjective, personal journey for me, going back and seeing films that I saw in the 80s and thinking of that decade. And, I think, and usually it's just kind of one film per director. But when I think of John Huston, I think like, okay, when I started getting into film in the early 80s, John Huston was like the great old man director. Hollywood has a great way of putting the elderly out to pasture. At least they did then. If you think of all the directors that had long careers, just think of Billy Wilder, George Cukor, Vincent Minnelli. You can just go down the list of all those guys. They were still alive. They just kind of got put on the bench the last 20 years of their life. The guys who were pretty embedded in Hollywood, the systems changed in the 60s. The studio kind of went away, and certainly by the 70s, you'd see occasionally they'd get a film made, but it was pretty much over for all of them. Orson Welles, of course, he's never really much of a Hollywood director, but friends with John Huston, younger than John Huston, and we know his story. So, but Huston was different. Huston was a rebel. Huston somehow just found a way to do it over and over. Renegade spirit, budgets of all sizes, very international director. But it was just exciting that the guy who did Maltese Falcon in 1941 was still making movies, in the 80s, and damn good movies too. If you think of what he did in his, let's just say, over 65 period, Fat City, Man Who Would Be King, Wise Blood, Under the Volcano, Prizzi's Honor, there's more in there. But he just kept cranking it out. And then The Dead, when this film opened, he had just died maybe a month or two before. I have a picture on my wall I mentioned last week. It's him hooked up to an oxygen tank making this movie from a wheelchair. But interestingly, and it seems like, and I've been saying for weeks, this is one of the great last movies. And it is. It is a perfect final note to a long, beautiful, thoughtful, just such a passionate career. But he apparently didn't think this was his last film. The dude's in his 80s, he barely can walk or breathe, but he had other movies he was still. So that tells you a lot about him. And this film apparently was, he felt The Dead, and he's not alone. I know we have a lot of Joyce people here tonight, but it's so many people think The Dead is the greatest short story in the English language, And because of that, you would think that would make it impossible to make a decent film of it. Great literature like that just usually doesn't translate, especially with that story's about. What it's about is, you would think, almost uncinematic. The language, all that, but damn it, and I'm getting ahead of myself here, if they doesn't pull it off somehow, and I haven't seen this in a while, but it's very simple. It's not a long movie. It's about 82 or 3 minutes, and the movie itself is like a perfect short story. It is the story. It's really in 2 parts. The first part is a holiday party. It's set in 2004. The Epiphany Feast was that January 6, 1904. I think Joyce wrote it in like 14. Looking back, a simple story. A husband and wife, Greta and Gabriel Conroy, go to a relative. He has these 2 kind of spinstery aunts. He's their favorite nephew, and their niece goes to their holiday party, let's call it. And, the families, family and friends get together. They gossip, they reminisce. And this movie is just an accumulation of detail. Pace yourself with it, because what it's doing is just adding a little layer upon life experience upon layer, about observation. They take a carriage ride. Because they live outside of Dublin, I think. They go to a hotel that night. They take a short ride. They're in the hotel, and so it's really just those 2 major scenes. But it builds to it all builds to a wonderful, one of the most beautiful endings, I think, in film history. Not to put any pressure on them, but I just think he takes Joyce's words, the sentiments, and everything that's come before, the people you've met. He just it's this incredible epiphany for the guy, his wife. I don't want to tell you the story as I remember it, but just that there's secret, passions and unknowableness, in people you think There's the dead have sway. They still have a big effect on the living. They, life is. You aren't who you think you are. It's a deep area, and I think he pulls it off so beautifully. And it's right there with John Huston's themes for every damn movie he ever did. The really consistent thematic body of work. Adventure stories, all these different, the films cover a lot of ground, very literary too, mostly adaptations, but consistent in their preoccupations, faith and, freedom, psychology. There's war and colonialism. There's just, a gamut, always a little bit of sadness and disappointment. The people usually don't get what they are questing for. If you know Treasure of the Sierra Madre, it's some over and over protagonists come up short, except in African Queen, I guess. That has a happy ending, right? We'll talk about that after, because what an incredible career. So I just think this is the best of both worlds. You get, Joyce and John Huston, two, that is a beautiful Irish movie too. The heart of, it's just a great Irish story. And I'm out of words to say. I'll shut up and let's just watch the movie, and we'll talk about it after, see what everybody else thinks. How many of you are seeing this for the first time? That's a lot of people. Good. Yeah, we're in for a real treat. This is in 35, and like I said, just kind of give yourself to it. The beauty. Huston was a painter. Literally, he was a visual artist. He painted a lot, but it has that kind of quality. Just settle into it and enjoy every little moment of it, and you will be rewarded, I assure you. So thanks a lot for being here. And Lars and I will get up here and talk, and it's just a discussion. I want to hear what you guys think. So, all right, thanks for being here. I was telling Lars I was thankful for at least some kind of credit sequence just to kind of pull it back together. Oh, man.
It's a really powerful, and I was just saying that, we should have closed the series with this one.
Oh, don't know.
Because it's such an
It's
ending.
interesting. These last two films, Wings of Desire next week, also very poetic, beautiful movie. It's an interesting last two to go out on. But that one actually has a couple falling in love. You know, if you want to break it down, a couple falling in love. A guy, you know, coming back to Earth to be a human for a girl. You know, there's a future there. This is, even though there's a future, they're not that old. Oh, God. It's Angelica Houston. I mean, the scene, that's just incredible. I forget the power. I mean, it's obviously, but I just was appreciating the total exquisiteness of her performance and just that. It's practically a soliloquy, but oh my God.
It's a film that, like, many times when you have like a work of great literature made into a film, it's sort of an illustration of it.
They come up short, you know, you can't do it. It doesn't translate somehow. I don't know how. Does anyone, you know, how did they, you know. It didn't try to be anything more, that's for sure. And I think they just really trusted the words and what it's about. You know, James Joyce was 25 when he wrote that. How's that possible? You know. It's interesting. An early short, so, you know, it's in his Dubliners, the early collection, I guess. And then Huston, last film, but I think it takes a lifetime of living a life to be able to capture this, you know, with others, you know, with a cast and a crew and all that. But what was in Joyce's heart at that moment would take a lifetime, I think, to pull off, you know, to physically manifest. So. Yeah, John Huston. I can't say enough about him. I mean, he's just, you know, he was like the Ernest Hemingway of filmmakers. What a life, you know, bigger than life character. He's been gone 30 years. People are still, you know, any of you ever see that film, White Hunter, Black Heart, the Clint Eastwood? He's clearly Clint Eastwood's idol. And Clint's doing he's the modern John Huston in that he's in his 80s still making, you know, relevant movies. But that movie's a depiction of him making, was it pre-production to African Queen? He's over there hunting. You know, he's just a bigger than life guy, a boxer, a painter, a wild game hunter, you know, just. And Angelica Houston wrote a book recently. I didn't read the whole thing. I read some excerpts from it, I think. And just talking about her life to be in that family in Ireland. He moved back to Ireland in the 50s. I think during HUAC and all that, he just got sick of the U.S. and went back to his, you know, his native land. And so she grew up mostly in Ireland and England and then came to the U.S. So really colorful life, amazing life. I think when he passed away, I remember reading an obit that day, and, you know, everyone was quoted, so many people in the film industry. And this huge, you know, power, this force had left us. And I remember Robert Mitchum, I don't know why I'm remembering this week, when he heard he died, he said, "Better put a stake in his heart." I don't know what that meant. What did that mean? I don't know.
But maybe it sort of signified that he had been a figure of such vitality that, like, there was no believing that he was dead unless it was some kind of assurance.
I just don't know why I remember.
There's a really good book by Lillian Ross, who also just died, called Picture, about John Huston, that you gotta read it. It's incredible.
One of the best, you know, they do it every generation. There's a couple books about making a movie. Mm-hmm. That was probably the first great one from the early 50s about the making of Red Badge of Courage. She got embedded with the crew, the cast, and go through the whole. That's just a wonderful. She's such a great writer, but that's a wonderful, wonderful depiction of Huston in the studio system trying to make a very challenging adaptation, Red Badge of Courage, and just all the crap you go through. It's sort of like Sunset Boulevard in that it's so contemporary. As someone, you know, in the film world now, it like you realize, oh, nothing's changed.
Yeah.
He made this film that he really put everything into. They had a crappy preview screening in Canoga Park or whatever. The audiences don't like it, so here comes the studio ready to chop it to shreds. And it was a real clash of Louis B. Mayer, and it's a great depiction of Louis B. Mayer. funny depiction.
We also get to understand the whole sort of backstory of John Huston, who was a sickly child, who almost died, and his parents and his doctor said, "You can't leave the house. You can get out of bed 3 hours a day or whatever." And he would wake up in the middle of the night, sneak out, and there's a waterfall near their house. Do you remember this part?
Not
And
really,
he would go over the waterfall every night, and then he'd sneak back and dry off and go back into bed, and like. He was just like, well, I'm going to die anyway. It doesn't matter. And
but how to go from sickly child to one of the more macho, masculine, figures.
He became a boxer and a bullfighter and a Mexican cavalry officer.
Through that era, he was friends with Hemingway.
Yeah,
they were contemporaries. Hemingway was a little older, but what a life.
And to imagine that like any filmmaker could be, fortunate enough to have, first of all, such a long career, but then to end it on the ultimate
and to have it be
ending.
Such a personal work from something that was in his heart for so long, but to do it with his daughter and his son Tony,
who wrote it,
who did the adaptation, that just must have been so special to him to have that family around him at that time. So it's incredible. When he passed away, he was acting at that moment, because he was such a great actor. I think of all directors think they can act, but or kind of can, but John Huston's the best actor, isn't he?
Orson Welles,
Well, but who are known primarily as a director.
Yeah.
Wells was an actor from the jump. Mm-hmm. Who also became one of the greatest directors. But Huston, his roles in, I think, Chinatown alone, but so many. And I think you met him, he was so mesmerizing. You're like, okay, you have to be in my movie. People just found roles for him. And he and Wells, they traded. They were in each other's movies.
Yeah, they were on the other side of the wind.
Yeah.
Playing the sort of Orson Welles analog.
He's playing that. And then, of course, Wells is in Moby Dick, and they were great comrades, very different. I remember sometime in the early 80s, 83, 84, Huston on TV, I remember watching this American Film Institute tribute to John Huston, and Wells spoke very eloquently about him. Everybody did, everybody gets up. Pele spoke, because he had done Victory, the football movie, so everybody spoke. Jack Nicholson, everybody. But it's great. I wonder if that's available.
Oh, I bet it's on YouTube.
Huston did that thing. I think he originated it. The thing that directors say, like, well, all my films are my kids. I can't. What's your favorite one? Everybody likes some and doesn't like the other. He said, they're all his kids, and even though one has faults and something, you kind of love them all equally. So,
well, he made a lot of great kids.
Yeah, he sure did.
And a few kind of okay.
No, really. I think his end of his career is really more consistent. The 40s were great. The 60s and
he did like the Bible.
Yeah, there was some unevenness there, and actually when. Like Andrew Sarris was writing the auteur Bible, he sort of left Huston out initially. And later in his career, Andrew Sarris even said he underestimated Huston. At the time, I think he thought he was just, he was pretty prolific, seen as, doing a lot of different kind of films. I don't think he latched on to the themes that he was consistently, he had such a long career, I guess he would consider Hollywood. And I think they were looking for, I don't know what, somehow but he admitted he underestimated him.
But that whole Fat City on run from the 70s on, it was unmistakable at that point.
Yeah, because I think what his themes and what his preoccupations get better with age. A lot of filmmakers, I think they're going in the opposite direction. But so he was just blessed, although a big smoker, he was blessed to live long enough to have that, that long life.
So if anybody here is a smoker and you smoke cigars, don't inhale them like you smoke. That's what he would do with cigars. He would smoke huge cigars and inhale them like actual cigarettes. And yet he still lived a long time.
Yeah, 80s, if he wouldn't have done that, maybe 90s.
He might still be alive today.
Making a film at 109 or whatever. I knew this film would get to me to some degree, but tonight I kind of went, oh, this film's even better than I even remember, which I didn't know the bar could go any higher. So, you know, it's all perfect. It's a great music montage.
It really builds out when you see when you see all the old stuff and the continuity. I think it builds out that this is sort of a process of generations, you know. And we see like the people through the different generations. Even Angelica Houston's husband, you know, we see him. He's declined. We see him in sort of he's not the man anymore.
You know, when I saw the medals with the old, you know, I don't know what war or what, you know, the old relative from. Yeah, and you think, oh, that's so meaningful now. But I thought tonight, like, what generation, the next, will it have no meaning? And it gets put in a box, and then it goes to some other, you know. It's like, isn't that what's happening to everything that's meaningful in our lives now? You know, that every memento, you know, that's what it's about, really. So, hey, what's this? I don't know. And that's, you know, that's with physical things and our memories, you know, and, you know, a boy we knew when we were young. Yeah. Religion and belief were pretty consistent in there. You know, Wise Blood is fascinating along those lines. If you haven't seen that lately, based on the Flannery O'Connor. I watched that recently, and actually there's a little, I guess, I don't know if there's a newer Criterion disc of it, but there's also kind of a making of documentary. And he went in kind of, he was saying, you know, he wasn't a believer, but the guy who adapted it, the Fitzgerald brothers, I believe, they were the literary executors of Flannery O'Connor's estate. They were friends. And so they had it, and they took this project to Houston, and he made I don't know, some kind of joke about religion up front, and at the end he said, oh, I've been had. You know, this movie's about a believer. You know, it's kind of, so he struggled with that, or really, it was always present. You know, so I think there is a certain religious quality. And we barely got this print, right?
Yeah, it was, well, that has to do with Lionsgate, but that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, I mean, when it came out, it was kind of a deal, but it wasn't like it wasn't a big hit. I remember it played couple weeks at the theater, and then just came and went, you know. I think it's such a quiet, I mean, this is never gonna, they're not going to line up around the block for it, but we're here 30 years later, you know, watching it. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, Angelica Houston was kind of a big star right now, hadn't she? She won an Oscar for Prizzi's Honor.
Grifters was a little later.
That was a little bit, 90 or so.
Yeah.
But you know, she was a big star. It was John Huston's last film. I just think the nature of the story, it just looked, you know, it didn't quite get into the romantic or whatever made Merchant Ivory films hits. This didn't have that, whatever that is. So I remember liking it. I remember it was talked about amongst, you know, cinephiles, but I don't think it was a big deal. But I don't know. So you're saying, yeah, it wasn't available on. I remember watching it on maybe it was slow to DVD, but it was definitely on video, because I remember watching a video of it sometime in the early 90s. I think that was the last time I was. Yeah.
This one also, the DVD came out, Lionsgate was a company
They did a mistake, right?
They screwed it up.
Yeah,
and they withdrew it from circulation, and then they had to go remake it, probably grudgingly. So it was just kind of like, it's a catalog title for a company that doesn't really care about servicing catalog titles. If it had ended up in the Criterion Collection, everybody would watch it. You know.
Is it too late to get it over there? Maybe not.
Probably not. We'll give them a call.
Yeah, films have a long life, you know. They could, you know, eventually they can.
But it really is screenings like this sometimes that help a film's reputation appreciate. It makes things, you know, it's hard to believe, but like, there's 200 and some people in this room, and everybody watched this film, and many had really close experiences with it, and that's kind of how like film culture sort of like it snowballs, or reputation grows.
I'm flashing for some reason on Pick. This book Pick that you mentioned, it's so damn funny.
Not Pick, Picture.
Picture,
right.
Picture.
Pick is the Jack Kerouac.
Oh, right. Picture. It's so funny. Do you remember how Louis B. Mayer, because he you know, like I said, he was kind of indie before there was officially indie. He had his own company for a while. And Louis B. Mayer is reaming him out because he's just done Asphalt Jungle. And he's like, this asphalt pavement crap movie about all these nasty people doing nasty things to each other. It's like, come on, you know, we need to make like Andy Hardy movies. Now that's what, you know, so he really just his kind of, and he says, and Red Badge of Courage, it's about, you know, a guy who's a coward, and it's not a great, you know, heroic war story, and he's pissed off about that, and he says, well, why, when it was your company, you made African Queen with big stars and every happy ending, now you want me to pay for it, and you're making this depressing movie. He's just on him the whole time. And I'm pretty sure that's where the Coen brothers, if you read that book, that's where they got Lipnick for Barton Fink, because I swear they're taking words and kind of gestures and mannerisms and stuff. Louis B. Mayer was fascinating, but what are those two doing together? But, you know, somehow he got away with it time after time. You know.
I feel like we're up here telling people to read books. What are we doing?
Yeah, well, and read Dubliners if you haven't. I understand there's not. Who here has read Finnegan's Wake? Wow.
Whoa.
Congratulations. I never made it through.
You guys read Finnegan's all
Okay,
seriously.
I've read everything else. I never made it through. I'll admit to not being able to make it through Finnegan. Well, thank you for being here. That's great.
Well, I think that's the final chapter to this Q&A.
We've come full circle here. Thanks so much. And all right, man. Well, next week, we go from Ireland to Germany. Berlin. Angels Over Berlin, also known as Wings of Desire.
And thanks everybody for being here. This is really special. Rick, thank you so much for
thank you
programming
guys.
this film.
Thanks for getting a good film.
Thanks everybody. Good night.
Yeah.